The billionaire's dog waited at the grave until the truth was unearthed. If you believe time heals everything, this story may change your mind. Stay until the end, because the truth buried beneath 3 years of silence is about to surface. On a gray Seattle evening, the city had already turned its lights on. But along the rural highway leading out of town, darkness settled early. The road curved past an old cemetery, its iron gates rusted and half open. A sleek black sedan slowed as rain began to fall in thin, slanting lines. Inside, Hadrian Lovelace, a man known for building empires of glass and code, gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had driven this route hundreds of times, but tonight something made him stop. Through the windshield, he saw movement, a flicker of white fur against the headstones. A group of teenagers stood near the fence, their laughter echoing in the cold. One of them threw a rock. A small dog yelped, stumbled, and collapsed near a grave. Without thinking, Hadrian pulled over and stepped into the rain. The cold bit through his tailored coat. "Hey, leave it alone," his voice carried across the open field. The boys froze, startled by the sudden authority of a man who clearly did not belong there. Within seconds they scattered, their sneakers slapping against wet pavement. Hadrian approached the trembling dog. Mud and blood mixed around its paw. It tried to stand but collapsed again, whimpering softly. The smell of wet earth filled the air. He crouched beside it, speaking low, the way you might to a frightened child. "Easy, easy. I am not going to hurt you." The dog blinked up at him, eyes clouded but trusting. Its collar was gone, fur tangled and thin. As Hadrian lifted it carefully into his arms, the torn sleeve of his coat caught on a jagged piece of stone. He looked down and read the name carved into the grave. Nayara Mendoza, 1995, 2022. For a moment, everything stilled. The rain fell harder, washing the dirt from the letters until they gleamed faintly under the headlights. The name stirred something deep inside him, a faint echo from a past he had tried to forget. He whispered it again, unsure if he was speaking to the grave or the ghost behind it. Nayara Mendoza, Lugo. He remembered that name from the charity files, the mural artist accused of stealing funds from his foundation, the one who disappeared in a studio fire 3 years ago. The case that had made headlines, the one that had made him retreat from the world. The dog whimpered again, snapping him out of it. He tightened his hold and turned toward the car. The creature's heart beat fast against his chest, fragile but determined. Back inside the sedan, he set the heater on high and wrapped the dog in his coat. Steam rose from their breath as the windows fogged. Outside, lightning flashed over the cemetery, illuminating rows of forgotten names. Hadrian glanced once more at the grave through the windshield. For reasons he could not explain, he could not drive away immediately. Something in that moment, a wounded creature, a storm, a familiar name anchored him there, as if the night itself demanded he remember. The rain softened to a drizzle. He whispered quietly, "Let us get you home." As he drove off, the headlights swept across the headstone one last time. The carved letters caught the light, glimmering like a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. And from that night on, the dog would never leave his side. Neither would the name carved into that stone. Now, let us return to our main character, Hadrian Lovelace, the billionaire who had just brought home a stray dog from a grave he should never have stopped to notice. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. The rain had stopped by the time Hadrian Lovelace reached his estate on the edge of Lake Washington. The driveway, lined with tall pines, glistened under the streetlights. His mansion stood silent, its glass walls reflecting the silver clouds drifting across the night sky. He parked the car, carried the dog inside, and set it gently on a towel in front of the fireplace. The animal looked up at him, uncertain but no longer afraid. When the first crackle of fire warmed the air, the dog relaxed, curling into a small ball of black and white fur. Hadrian crouched beside it, rubbing his cold hands together. "You've been through something terrible, huh?" His voice was calm, almost detached, yet a trace of softness slipped through. He poured warm water into a bowl and found an old first aid kit. Cleaning the dog's paw, he noticed scars that told a story of neglect and survival. "Who left you there?" he murmured. "And why her grave?" His question hung unanswered in the quiet room. The only response was the steady sound of the fireplace and the faint rhythmic breathing of the dog. Hadrian leaned back in the armchair. On the wall behind him, rows of modern art pieces glowed under subtle lighting, but none of them caught his eye. His gaze was fixed instead on a photograph placed face down on the side table. He reached for it hesitantly, turned it over, and stared. It was taken at a charity gala 4 years earlier. He was smiling, younger, surrounded by artists and volunteers. Among them stood a woman with paint-stained hands, hair falling to her waist, and the brightest eyes in the room, Nayara Mendoza. The memory hit him like cold water. He had sponsored her mural project through his foundation. She had called it Walls of Light, a series of public art pieces painted in low-income neighborhoods to inspire hope. For months, her team became a symbol of compassion. Then came the accusation: stolen funds, fake invoices, and a missing witness. When the fire broke out in her studio, the case closed itself. Hadrian had believed the numbers on the reports, not the person behind them. The board of his foundation had urged him to cut ties and protect the brand. He had obeyed. He never reached out, never asked questions. He simply moved on, or at least tried to. But seeing her name on that gravestone tonight, something shifted. The distance he had built around himself began to crack. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at his reflection in the dark window-sharp suit, expensive watch, and tired eyes that had seen too much success and too little meaning. The dog stirred and whimpered softly. Its collar was gone, but when Hadrian lifted the fur around its neck, he found a faint marca shape that looked like the edge of a tag once attached there. He whispered, "You must have belonged to her." The thought made his chest tighten. He stood, placed a blanket over the dog, and walked toward the study. Shelves lined with books about leadership, economics, and philosophy framed the room, but the only light came from the computer screen. He opened the old charity files. Scrolling through pages of transactions, he stopped when he saw her name again: Nayara Mendoza, project director. The date of termination was 2 days before the fire. His jaw tightened. The memo had been signed by Victor Hale, his former partner and head of finance. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen. "What did we do to you, Nayara?" he whispered. "And what did they hide from me?" Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the trees like a voice carried from the past. Inside, the dog lifted its head and watched him from across the room, its eyes reflecting the firelight. Hadrian looked back at the creature, realizing it might be the last living thing that knew her truth. And that truth, he decided, would not stay buried any longer. The following morning, the air outside was sharp with the chill of early spring. Fog hovered over the lake as Hadrian Lovelace walked down the marble stairs, his steps echoing softly through the quiet house. The dog was already awake, sitting near the front door as if waiting for permission to leave. Hadrian poured a cup of coffee and watched it from across the kitchen. "You want to go back there, do you?" he said quietly. The animal tilted its head, ears lifting at the sound of his voice. "All right then," he sighed, setting down the cup. "Let us see what you are trying to show me." He placed a fresh bandage on the dog's paw, clipped a spare leash to its collar, and drove back toward the cemetery. The morning fog thickened, wrapping the trees in silver mist. When he parked, the dog jumped out and trotted confidently down the familiar path, stopping at the same grave as before. The ground was damp but undisturbed, except for a patch of fresh soil near the headstone. The dog began to dig frantically. Hadrian knelt beside it, brushing away the dirt with his hands. After several minutes, his fingers struck something metallic. It was a small tin box, rusted around the edges and sealed with melted wax. He opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in charred fabric, was a folded piece of paper, its edges blackened, the ink faded but still legible. The handwriting was delicate, looping across the page. "If anyone finds this, please tell Hadrian Lovelace the truth. I did not take the money. They said they would kill me if I spoke their names." "Nayara." Hadrian froze, the sound of the wind disappearing into silence. His own name written in her hand made his heart jolt. He could almost hear her voice, steady but afraid. He read the note again, slower this time, as if the words themselves were trying to breathe after years underground. Then he looked at the dog, now sitting still beside him, eyes fixed on the letter. "You have been guarding her secret all this time," he whispered. "Good boy." He slipped the letter into his coat pocket and stood, brushing dirt from his hands. The clouds above shifted, revealing a sliver of sunlight that fell directly across the grave. It felt like a sign. Back at the mansion, he laid the letter flat under a soft lamp, photographing it before sealing it in a plastic sleeve. The handwriting matched the old thank you note she had once written after their first charity partnership. There was no doubt it was real. He turned on his computer, opening the archives of the foundation again. File after file appeared, expense sheets, audit trails, contracts, but everything from the final month before the fire was missing. Entire folders had been deleted. Only the metadata remained, and one name appeared repeatedly in the digital record. Victor Hale. Hadrian stared at it for a long time. Victor had been his closest confidant, the man who handled the financial operations of the entire company. If Nayara had tried to expose something, Victor would have known. The dog barked suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts. Its paws scratched against the floor, pacing near the window. Hadrian followed its gaze and noticed the faint reflection of his own face against the glass. The man looking back at him seemed older than he remembered, haunted, burdened. He exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "If she left me this, I will find the rest." He searched his memory, recalling where Nayara had lived. A small apartment near Capitol Hill, above a closed art cafe. Maybe her sister still lived there. That night, he packed the letter, slipped the photograph into his briefcase, and prepared to leave in the morning. The dog lay at the foot of his bed, one paw resting over its muzzle, as if keeping watch. For the first time in years, Hadrian did not fall asleep to the hum of machines or the echo of numbers. He fell asleep to the quiet breathing of the only witness left from a past he had tried to erase. Outside, the wind swept across the lake, carrying with it a whisper of her name. And when morning came again, the path ahead was already waiting for him to follow. The next morning, the sun broke through thin layers of fog as Hadrian Lovelace drove into the city. The streets were already alive, with people rushing to work, the rhythm of ordinary lives unfolding around him. Yet his mind was fixed on a single destination, the old neighborhood where Nayara Mendoza once lived. Coco sat in the passenger seat, head resting on the window, eyes following every blur of passing trees. The dog seemed to know where they were going, as if memory still guided its senses. The cafe on the corner was small and worn, its sign half faded from years of rain. Hadrian parked nearby, stepped out, and pushed open the door. A soft chime rang as he entered. The smell of roasted coffee and cinnamon filled the air. Behind the counter stood a young woman with shoulder-length dark hair, her eyes tired but kind. She looked up, surprised by the tall stranger in an expensive suit with a dog at his side. "Good morning," she said. "Can I get you something?" Hadrian hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I am looking for someone," he replied. Her name was Nayara Mendoza. The woman's expression shifted, softening into something between pain and recognition. "You knew my sister." Her voice carried both warmth and restraint. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer. "I am Lucha Mendoza." "Lao." For a long moment, neither spoke. Coco broke the silence, wagging its tail and letting out a soft bark. Luca knelt instinctively, her eyes widening. "Coco," she whispered, "you are still alive?" "Lao." The dog pressed against her, whining with joy. She buried her face in its fur, tears welling up before she could stop them. Hadrian stood quietly, letting the reunion unfold. When she finally looked up, her voice trembled. "Where did you find him?" "At a cemetery outside the city," Hadrian said. "He was lying by her grave." Luca nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "He used to wait there every evening after the fire. Then one day he just disappeared. I thought he was gone for good." Hadrian took a deep breath and reached into his coat pocket. "I found something else," he said, placing a sealed plastic sleeve on the counter. Inside was the letter. It was buried near her headstone. Luxa's hands shook as she lifted it. The moment she saw the handwriting, her lips parted. "This is hers," she whispered. "She wrote this before the fire." Tears filled her eyes as she read the message. "She was trying to tell someone," she said softly. But no one believed her. Hadrian nodded, guilt heavy in his chest. "I believed the wrong people. I should have protected her." Luca looked at him for the first time with curiosity rather than blame. "You are Hadrian Lovelace, are you not?" "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I was the sponsor of her project." "Mol." Luxa placed the letter down carefully. "She admired you," she said. "Not because you were rich or powerful, but because you cared about the communities she painted for. She used to say that you understood what dignity looked like." Her words hit him harder than any accusation could have. He glanced toward the calf wall where a faded sketch hung in a frame, a fragment of one of Nayara's murals. He stepped closer and studied it. Within the swirling colors of blue and gold was a small symbol, a geometric pattern identical to the logo of Lovelace Innovations. Hadrian turned back to Luca. "She hid my company's mark in her art." Luca nodded. It was her way of reaching out. She said if anything ever happened to her, the truth would find its way back to the person who started it all. Coco barked once, breaking the silence again. The sound seemed almost deliberate, like an echo of Nayara's will. Luxa wiped her eyes and whispered, "If that letter is real, then someone wanted her gone, and we both know who had the most to lose." Hadrian's gaze hardened. Victor Hale. The name lingered between them, heavy as thunder before a storm. Luca nodded slowly. "He came here once, after the fire. He told me to stop asking questions." Hadrian clenched his jaw. He buried her truth to protect his lies. Luca looked down at Coco, then back at him. "Then maybe it is time we unbury it." "Otwe." Hadrian exhaled, steadying himself. For the first time, the guilt in his eyes turned into resolve. "I will find proof," he said quietly, "no matter what it costs." And as he left the cafe, Coco at his side, Luxa's voice followed softly through the open door. "Bring her justice, Mr. Lovelace." That is all she ever wanted. Rain rolled over the city that evening, turning the glass windows of Lovelace Innovations into mirrors of lightning and cloud. Hadrian Lovelace stood alone in his office. The letter from Nayara Mendoza spread open on his desk. The handwriting trembled across the page like a voice from another life. He had read it 100 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. They said they would kill me if I spoke their names. For the first time in years, he felt something other than pride or exhaustion. He felt responsibility and shame. He turned toward the wide window overlooking downtown Seattle. The city lights shimmered against the dark water, distant and indifferent. Behind him, Coco rested quietly by the door, head on its paws, watching every movement as if understanding the weight in the room. Hadrian's assistant had long since gone home, leaving only the hum of the servers and the faint ticking of the wall clock. He opened the company archives again, fingers gliding over the keyboard, tracing the pattern of missing files. Every deleted document led back to the same source, Victor Hale, his longtime partner and chief financial officer. Victor had joined him 12 years ago when Lovelace Innovations was just a dream coded in a basement. Together they had built an empire of technology and philanthropy. But now, the trail of hidden transactions pointed to betrayal and to Nayara's death. Hadrian closed the laptop, breathing slowly to steady his pulse. He reached for his phone and called an old contact in the Department of Justice, someone who owed him a favor. "I need a forensic team to review deleted files," he said. Quietly, no leaks, no press. "Understood," the man replied. "How far back?" 3 years, Hadrian said. "Start with the Hope Walls Foundation." He ended the call and stared at the letter again. The paper was fragile, but the truth it carried was not. The next morning, he drove back to the cafe to see Luxa Mendoza. The shop was quiet, a slow hum of jazz playing from a corner speaker. She looked up when he entered, the worry already written across her face. "Did you find something?" she asked. "I found what Victor erased," he said. "Bank transfers, offshore accounts, all signed under the foundation's name. Nayara was trying to expose him." Luxa's eyes darkened. "That man destroyed her life." "He destroyed her truth," Hadrian corrected gently. "But he will not keep it buried." "But..." He showed her the printouts, lines of code and digital timestamps. She studied them, confused but trusting. "Can this prove she was innocent?" "It can prove much more than that," Hadrian said. "It can prove who set the fire." For the first time, a spark of hope crossed her face. "Then what happens now?" "Now," Hadrian said quietly, "we make them listen." That night he returned to his estate. Rain drummed against the windows again, steady and relentless. He fed Coco and sat by the fireplace, the flicker of flames dancing over the letter's plastic cover. He thought of Nayara, of the night she must have written those final words, of the fear she felt when she realized no one believed her. He imagined her standing before the mural she never finished, hands covered in paint, still hoping the truth would find its way out. He whispered, "You tried to warn me." The next morning, his phone buzzed with a message from his security chief. "We found something." It was a video clip recovered from an old external drive stored in the Foundation's warehouse. The timestamp matched the night of the fire. The footage showed Victor entering the art studio, a gas can in one hand, papers in the other. The screen flickered, then cut to static. Hadrian's heart pounded. The evidence was real. The final piece of the puzzle had surfaced. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a long moment. When he opened them, his decision was clear. The next time he saw Victor, it would not be as a friend or partner. It would be as the man who owed justice to the woman whose name still whispered through every line of that letter. He looked down at Coco, who lifted its head, alert and waiting. "Come on, boy," Hadrian said softly. "It is time to finish what she started." The rain returned the next evening, falling hard against the tall windows of Hadrian Lovelace's estate. The entire house felt charged with unease, as if the storm outside had crawled into its walls. The letter from Nayara Mendoza lay on the table beside the fireplace, next to the flash drive containing the recovered footage. Coco sat nearby, ears perked, sensing tension. Hadrian had not moved for nearly an hour. He was staring into the flames, waiting for the inevitable message that would come once Victor Hale realized the past had resurfaced. The phone rang. "Hadrian," Victor's voice came through, smooth as ever, though something beneath it trembled. "I heard you have been digging into old files." Hadrian's tone was calm but cold. "You mean the ones you deleted?" Victor laughed lightly. "Careful. You know how the media loves a scandal. What are you really trying to prove?" "I am proving that Nayara was innocent," Hadrian said, "and that you killed her." There was silence on the other end. Then Victor spoke slowly. "That is a dangerous accusation. You would not want to damage your own empire chasing ghosts." "Some ghosts deserve to be heard," Hadrian replied. Then he ended the call. He turned to Coco. "We are running out of time." The next morning, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the property. Two men in gray suits stood by the gate, claiming they were from a security firm. Hadrian's staff hesitated, but he knew exactly who had sent them. Victor was trying to intimidate him into silence. Hadrian ordered his head of security to escort them off the property. Then he made another call, this time to Luca Mendoza. "You need to stay somewhere safe for a few days," he told her. "Do not go home. Victor knows we met." Luca's voice tightened with fear. "What about you?" "I will be fine," Hadrian said. "Just promise me you will keep the letter hidden. It is the only thing he cannot erase." That night, Luca arrived at the estate with a small suitcase. The calf had received threatening phone calls and she was too afraid to stay alone. Hadrian led her to the guest wing, offering reassurance he did not entirely feel. Coco followed close behind, tail low but protective. The dog had become a silent guardian between them, pacing the hallway whenever the wind howled through the trees. As the hours passed, Hadrian and Luca sat in the study surrounded by stacks of documents. He showed her the forensic report proof that the accelerant used in the studio fire matched the kind Victor had stored in his private facility. Luca's hands trembled as she read it. "So it really was him." Hadrian nodded. "He tried to cover his tracks, but digital evidence never dies completely." Luca looked toward the window, where lightning flashed across the lake. "If Nayara were alive to see this, she would not want revenge," Hadrian said softly. "She would want the truth." "Damn you." Their eyes met in quiet understanding. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Moments later, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, glass shattering, then silence. Coco leapt to its feet, barking furiously. Hadrian motioned for Luca to stay back and moved toward the staircase. He found the front door open, the wind whipping rain into the foyer. The SUV was gone, but a shadow moved at the edge of the trees. Whoever had been there was already retreating. He closed the door and locked it, his pulse steady but furious. "They are trying to scare us," Luca said, standing behind him. "They are scared themselves," Hadrian replied, "because they know the truth is coming." He picked up the letter from the table and held it carefully, the faint handwriting still visible beneath the lamplight. "Tomorrow, I will go public. No more silence." Luca placed her hand over the letter, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then tomorrow, she will finally rest." Hadrian nodded. "And justice will have a name again." As midnight passed, the storm began to fade. Coco curled near the fire, eyes heavy but alert. Hadrian watched the last embers burn down, knowing that dawn would not just bring light. It would bring reckoning, and for the first time in years, he was ready to face it. The morning arrived cold and still, the kind of gray dawn that hung over Seattle like an unfinished thought. Inside the mansion, Hadrian Lovelace stood in front of the mirror, straightening his tie. His reflection looked sharper than he felt, the weight of the coming day heavy on his shoulders. On the table behind him lay everything that mattered: the letter from Nayara Mendoza, the forensic report, and the recovered video clip showing Victor Hale walking into the studio before the fire. Each piece of evidence was ready to be handed to the authorities, but Hadrian knew this had to end in public, the same way the lie had begun. Luca entered quietly, dressed in a dark coat, her face pale but resolute. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. Hadrian nodded once. He buried her truth in front of the world. "That is where I will uncover it." The annual Lovelace Foundation Gala was, that evening, a lavish event meant to celebrate generosity and progress. For years, Victor had used it to polish his image as a man of virtue. This year, the stage would belong to truth. By dusk, the ballroom glowed with crystal light. Journalists gathered near the red carpet, cameras flashing. Hadrian arrived with Luque at his side, Coco staying behind at the estate under guard. The murmur of voices followed him as he entered, whispers of admiration mixed with confusion. He rarely attended these events anymore. Victor Hale was already there, shaking hands, smiling his polished smile. His eyes flicked toward Hadrian, and for a split second, that charm faltered. "Hadrian," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "You look like a man with a mission tonight." Hadrian accepted the handshake briefly. You could say that. The evening unfolded with speeches, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Then, when Victor took the stage to announce a new round of community grants, Hadrian stepped forward, interrupting him with a calm voice that carried across the hall. "Before we continue," Hadrian said, "there is something the world needs to see." "Come, Mo." The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life, displaying the date 3 years ago, the night of the fire. Gasps filled the room as the grainy footage showed Victor entering the art studio with a gas can. Then came the image of him tossing papers into the corner, a faint flash of flame, and his hurried exit. The room went silent. Victor's voice broke through the darkness, strained but defiant. "This is fake. You cannot prove that is me." "Do." Hadrian's voice was calm but final. "Then explain this." He held up the letter, sealed in its protective sleeve. "Nayara Mendoza wrote this before she died. She named you. And the same accelerant found in the footage was traced to your private storage." The crowd turned. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. The facade around Victor collapsed as security officers moved in, guided by detectives who had been quietly waiting in the wings. Luxa's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. The ballroom was no longer a place of glamour. It had become a courtroom of light and truth. Victor was escorted away as he shouted into the noise, his words drowned by the sound of justice finally speaking for itself. Hadrian turned toward Luxa. "It is over," he said softly. She shook her head, still crying. "No, Hadrian. It is finally beginning." "Kudo." And as the lights came back on, the crowd erupted in applause, not for wealth, not for spectacle, but for a name that had been buried too long. Nayara Mendoza. The weeks that followed the gala felt like the first breath after a long storm. The newspapers ran headlines about Victor Hale's arrest and the reopening of the Hope Walls Foundation case. Investigators confirmed what the evidence had already whispered: embezzlement, arson, and obstruction of justice. For the first time, Nayara Mendoza's name appeared beside the word innocent. In the quiet of his office, Hadrian Lovelace watched the news report play out on television. The anchor's voice echoed softly through the room. "The philanthropist, Nayara Mendoza, has been posthumously cleared of all wrongdoing. Her art foundation will be reinstated under new leadership, and the Lovelace Foundation has announced a memorial project to honor her legacy." "Tomsagwang." Hadrian turned off the screen and sat in silence. It did not feel like victory. It felt like release. The weight that had pressed on him for 3 years had finally shifted, though a hollow ache still lingered where regret had lived. He spent the following days working on something personal. With Luxa Mendoza's help, he began planning a public exhibition to unveil Nayara's unfinished mural, the one she had started before the fire. Luxa had kept the surviving fragments in storage, and under her careful restoration, the colors began to return. Gold, blue, and a single line written faintly in white paint: "Every truth will find its dawn." On the day of the unveiling, the city gathered in a wide plaza near the waterfront. The wall stood 30 feet high, wrapped in a thin white sheet that rippled gently in the breeze. Cameras lined the edges, journalists waiting, and citizens stood shoulder to shoulder. Hadrian took the stage beside Luxa. Coco sat quietly near their feet, wearing a small blue ribbon around its collar. The late afternoon light turned the scene golden, soft but certain. Luxa stepped forward first. Her voice was calm, steady, filled with the kind of strength her sister once carried. "This wall," she said, "was meant to speak for those who are silenced. Today, it speaks for my sister, and for everyone who ever believed that truth can survive even when hope burns." The crowd fell silent as Hadrian walked to the microphone. "For 3 years," he began, "I built walls of glass and steel, but I forgot what a real wall was meant to do. Nayara built walls that reflected people's hearts. She reminded us that leadership is not about what we build for ourselves, but what we build for others." He gestured toward the covered mural. "Today, we finish what she started." Luxa pulled the cord, and the white sheet fell away. The mural came to life in the golden light, an ocean of color and movement. In its center stood a woman with paint-stained hands, releasing a dove into the sky. Beneath her was a single signature, Nayara Mendoza. Gasps and applause filled the plaza. Some cried openly. Coco barked once, as if recognizing the moment. Hadrian felt the wind lift across his face. For the first time in years, it did not sting. It carried warmth. He whispered under his breath, "You can rest now, Nayara. The world finally sees you." And beside him, Luxa smiled through her tears. "Light always remembers," she said softly. The cameras clicked. The mural gleamed. And in that light, justice did not just prevail, it lived. As the sun dipped below the Seattle skyline, the golden light over the mural softened into amber. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving only a few candles flickering at the base of the wall. The city's noise returned in gentle waves, car horns, footsteps, the low hum of life moving forward. Hadrian Lovelace stood a few paces back, his coat draped over one arm, his gaze fixed on the mural. The image of Nayara Mendoza releasing the dove shimmered faintly under the streetlights. It felt alive, as if her spirit breathed within the colors she left behind. Beside him, Lucha Mendoza placed a bouquet of white lilies on the ground. Coco lay nearby, its head resting on its paws, watching the two of them in quiet contentment. The dog had not barked once since the ceremony ended, as though it too understood that peace had finally come. Luxa looked up at the mural, her voice soft but clear. "She always said truth was like paint," she murmured. "No matter how many times you try to cover it, it will bleed through." Hadrian smiled faintly. She was right. They stood in silence for a moment, before Luxa turned to him. "What will you do now?" Hadrian exhaled, his breath visible in the cool evening air. "For the first time, I do not know," he admitted. "But whatever I build next, it will carry her name." Luxa nodded. She would have liked that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter Nayara's final words, preserved behind its thin layer of plastic. He unfolded it carefully and placed it inside a small glass case beneath the mural, next to the lilies. "This belongs here," he said, "where truth finally found the light." Luca's eyes glistened as she whispered, "Thank you, Hadrian." He shook his head. "Do not thank me. I was late to believe her. You were the one who never stopped." The streetlights flickered once, reflecting on the wet pavement. A warm breeze brushed past, carrying the faint scent of rain and paint. Coco stood, walked to the mural, and sat quietly before it, tail curled around its body. Hadrian crouched down beside the dog, resting a hand on its back. "She would be proud of you too," he said gently. "You never gave up on her." Luca smiled through tears. "Neither did you." Hadrian looked up at the mural once more. The woman in the painting seemed to meet his gaze, her expression serene and unafraid. The words beneath her glowed faintly under the city light. "Every truth will find its dawn." He whispered, "It did, Nayara. It finally did." They walked away together, the sound of their steps mingling with the city's rhythm. Behind them, the mural stood tall and luminous, a permanent reminder that kindness and courage could outlast even the darkest lies. Coco lingered for a moment longer before following, glancing back one last time at the painted sky. The night settled quietly, peaceful and whole, and as the final breeze swept through the plaza, it carried a whisper only the faithful could hear, that love, once true, never really dies.